Hello everyone, welcome to this video, to this live session. So let us wait a little bit for people to join us. Then we're going to discuss the code and teach you what we are planning to teach. Okay. Okay. So first of all, let me share my screen. Okay, great. So now you should be able to see my screen. Okay, we're going to start in a few seconds. Okay. So we're going to discuss about functions in today's video. Functions are very useful because they're going to help us to improve the readability of our code. For example, if you have 200 lines of code, and if you would like to, for example, print certain mathematical operations or perform, let's say, certain mathematical operations, you don't have to write them several times. For example, if I want to make an example here, let me just create a part here. So here I'm going to have a variable called x, it is equal to 10, and I'm having a variable called y, it is equal to 20. So now I have the output. For example, z is my x and y, and I'm going to print the value of z. Okay, so it is 30. Now, when I have this, I can have another variable called r, which is 5, and I have another variable called w, which is, for example, 2. So now I can have the q equals r plus w, and I'm going to print q in the output. So you see that number 7 is being printed here in the output. So just imagine that this is one block of code, I would say, and this is another block of code. Just imagine that we are going to add, for example, 200 numbers. So we are going to have a lot of these blocks. And when I start coding, start reading the code from this part. From here, I start reading the code. And as I move down, I see, okay, there is one variable here, another variable here. We are doing addition, we're printing it. Okay, so next line, I'm having a variable here, another one here, and I'm adding these two variables to each other, and I'm printing the output. Okay, so it's a repetitive task that is being done several times. Why? Because we are having the addition many times. So in order to avoid this and improve the code's readability, we are going to define functions. So now, for example, here we are going to have a function that adds two numbers. Okay. So here, as you see, I have a function called add numbers, and I know that it's a function because I'm using the def keyword. And here, as you see, this function requires me to have, for example, two arguments. Okay, so two arguments are there, x and y. And this function is going to add two numbers together. So whenever this function is called, we need two arguments, x and y. And this function is going to return x plus y, and that's it. So here I have the add numbers function being called with two values, 5 and 3. And the output of this function is assigned to a variable called result. So here I call the add numbers function. I pass 5 and 3, so x equals 5, y equals 3. And then this function is basically having the 5 plus 3 in the output. So it is going to return this number, and the return number is assigned to the result. And finally, we are printing the result. Okay, so when I run the code, the output is 8. So I would like to do another addition. I write down results 2, for example. Uh, sorry, results 2, for example. And here I'm having two numbers being added to each other again. So the result two variable is being created, and the number that is assigned to results two is the function call with 10 and 20. So this function now is called with number 10 and 20. This function is going to calculate 10 plus 20 and return the output. And the output, when it is returned, it is assigned to results two variable. And then we are printing this variable again. You see that here we are doing the addition in one line and we are printing it here. Okay. But here we were having more lines to do the same repetitive tasks. So this is why I mentioned that writing a function is very good to improve the coding, readability, and efficiency. So this is the first example that we had here for the function call. And when I want to move to another example here, for example, when I go here, we see that we are having another example for calculating the square of a number. So let me put the space a bit here. So here I am defining a function that is called square numbers, and it requires one variable as the argument. Basically, whenever this function is called, it is going to calculate the square of number that is passed as argument to this function. This function is going to have the square underscore number. This is the name of the function. And for example, here I'm calling the square number function and passing number 4 as the argument. So this number 4 is being passed to this function. The compiler is going to calculate 4 multiplied by 4. Okay. So 4 multiplied by 4, it is 16. So 16 is the output of this function, and this 16 is assigned to the variable called result, and we are printing the result variable, which is 16 here in the output. Okay. So if I want to have another one, I can have, for example, result 2. Here it's the result 2. Here is the result 2, and I have the call of the function, which is 6 here, for example. So when I run, the square number function is called, the number 6 is being passed as the argument, and 6 multiplied by 6 is 36. So it is going to return 36, and it is going to assign 36 to the results 2, and it is going to print results 2 in the output in the end. Okay. Then we are having the third example where we are calculating if a number is an even number or not. So this is the is even function that we are having here. So whenever this function is called, it is going to check to see if that number, if whenever this function is called, we need to have an argument, sorry. So this number that is passed as argument, this function is going to check if that number is divided by 2. The remainder of this division using the modulo operator equals 0 or not. So if it equals 0, it means that that number is true. It means that number is even, sorry. Okay. So, and what is the definition of an even number? An even number is a number that that is divided by 2 and the remainder of the division equals 0. Okay, so whenever we divide a number by 2 and the remainder of this division equals 0, it means that that number is an even number. Okay, so we are checking to see if the number x is divided by 2 and the remainder of this division equals 0, it means that that number is even. Therefore, it is going to return true as the output of the is even function. Okay, modulus operator is going to help us to the remainder of a division. So let me illustrate it with an example. We are calling the is even function. So is even function is called, and we are passing number 6 as the argument. Okay. So compiler goes and calls this is even function with number 6. So here the compiler is going to check this function is going to implement 6 divided by 2. The remainder of this division equals 0. Is it true? Yes, this statement is true. Therefore, it is going to return true. True is the output of the is even function, and now true is assigned to the result variable, and here we are printing the result variable. So when I run this code, we see that true is being printed here in the output. But if I call this is even function another time, for example, result 2, and I call the is even function with number 7, okay? I call it with number 7. So when I call this is even function with number 7, basically what's happening here is the following. So 7 is passed as argument for the is even function. And here we are having 7 divided by 2. The remainder of this division, is it equal to 0? No, it's not equal to 0. 7 divided by 2, the remainder of this division is not equal to 0. Therefore, we are going to return false. And the returned false Boolean is assigned to result 2 variable, and here we are printing the result 2 variable, and we see that the false is shown here in the output. So this function is going to help us to check if a number is even or odd. But the thing is that now that we were using the is even function, it was going to help us to simply find an even number. But if we wanted to find it manually ourselves without defining a function, we had to write this line many times, like 100 times if we were going to check 100 numbers. So this is not very efficient, and it does not help to have an efficient code that has a high level of readability. Therefore, function is going to help us to do the repetitive tasks for different variables or values. Okay, so I can have like the call of this is even function 100 times without reducing the readability of my code. Okay, so let me go for another coding exercise here. Here we would like to have a function that is called greet, and this function is going to greet people. So whenever this function is called, we need to have an argument that is here in parentheses. And whenever we would like to initialize a function, we need to have this def keyword in the beginning. So by seeing this def keyword, I understand, okay, this is a definition of a function. The name of the function is greet, and this is the name of the argument that is passed whenever this function is called. And this function is going to greet a person by name. For example, here I call the greet function, and now I'm passing an argument here, which is Alice. So I call the greet function with an argument, okay? An argument which is Alice here, okay? And name now equals Alice because this is the argument that we use to call the function. Now, this function, what it's going to do is the following. This function, whenever it is called, it is going to use the print function to print this message first, hello, with a comma, then plus name, and then plus this mark, okay? So when I run this code, it says, hello, Alice. So the name is exactly the argument that is passed to this function. It is going to print Alice name there. So it is a customized function. So if I call this function one more time, and this time I write down Reza, for example, I call the function with the name Reza. So the greet function is called with the name Reza. And now the greet function is called with the name Reza. It is going to print hello, comma, and the name, which is the argument of this function, which is Reza this time that I called for the second time. So when I run the code, we see that hello, Reza message is being shown here in the output. For example, we could have another function here that is going to have name and surname. So I would like to have the def greet to, so the name of my function is now greet2, and we are going to have two arguments, for example, name and a last name. Okay, so now I would like to define it. I define it this way. This is the greet2 function that I am defining. The name of the function is greet2. I know that it's a function from the def keyword that we are having here. And then here is the argument. So the first argument is the name, the second argument is last name. So by looking at the greet2 function, I must be able to understand that, okay, this function, whenever it is called, it requires two arguments, okay, and one representing the name, one representing the last name, okay. So this time I call the greet2 function. And this greet2 function is called, and two arguments, or let's say two strings, are passed as arguments when calling this greet2 function. The first one is Reza, which is the first name, for example. The second one is Shaheen, which is the last name. So when I run this code, the compiler is going to call the greet2 function with these two arguments, Reza and Shaheen. And it is going to use the print function and first of all show this message, hello. So hello with a comma is being printed here in the output. Then we are adding to this hello string the name. Okay, we are having the name that was passed as the first argument, which was Reza. So Reza is there. Then we are having the addition operator again. We are having a space because I would like to have a space between Reza and Shaheen. I don't want them to be smashed together. So I'm having a space here. Then I have another addition. Then I add the last name, which is the second argument for the call of the greet2 function, which is also here the second argument, Shaheen. So Shaheen is there. Then I'm having the exclamation mark here being printed in the output. So this is a function that can help me to have the first name and the last name. But we can have another function. For example, we can have the greet3 function where I have the name equals, for example, as the default value. So we could have, for example, the default value could be, for example, uh, Reza, okay? And whenever, oh, let's say friend, my friend. Okay. So now this function is going to uh, be called whenever we call the greet3 function. So this greet3 function is going to implement a default argument here. What do we mean by a default argument? Let me illustrate it with an example. In the first function, we were calling the greet function and we were having one string. So I was calling the greet function and calling the string Alice or Reza. And we saw that in the output, it was showing this message. Hello, Alice. Hello, Reza. In the second one, we added the last name. So we needed two arguments there. Reza Shaheen. First name, last name. Okay. And hello, Reza Shaheen is shown in the output. Okay, so whenever we called this greet2 function, we had to have two arguments. Otherwise, we would have had an error. So if I call the greet2 function with one argument, you see that I'm going to have errors here. Why? Because the function itself says that I need two arguments. Now I'm giving one argument, so there is an error. Okay. Again, here, if now I'm having one argument here. If I add another argument when calling the greet function, like if I say, for example, Alice Shaheen, when I run the code, we are going to have errors. Why? The reason for this error, let me let's wait to this message go. The reason for this error is the fact that this function requires one argument only. And if we call the function with two arguments, there will be an error. But this function greet3 is a function with default values. Therefore, it is going to help us to have the flexibility when we are calling the function. Let me illustrate it with an example. So this is the greet3 function. I'm calling the greet3 function with no arguments, although we are having the name as the argument there. Okay. So when I look at the output, we are seeing that it says, hello, my friend. So I called the function with no arguments. First of all, I did not have any error. Second of all, this my friend message is shown, but I didn't put any argument in parentheses. What's happening here? So what's happening here is the following. This function is a function with default parameter or with default argument, let's say. Basically, it is going to print hello message, first of all, with a comma, and then add the name as the argument. So if I call a function with no name, with no argument, basically what it's going to do is to assign the my friend as the default value. Okay, basically, this is what's going to happen. It is going to by default consider my friend as the default argument for the name. So when we call the function with no argument, we see that hello my friend is shown in the output. However, when we call the greet3 function and we pass one argument like Alice, we see that this function is called, and this time my friend is not used, but this Alice is being used in the output. So we see that hello Alice message is shown in the output. So this is one thing that was very important to learn. So we learned how to have functions with default values to give us the flexibility to be able to call the function with or without an argument. And finally, we're going to have another function here. This function is going to help us to find the maximum number among two numbers. So the name of this function is find underscore maximum, and there are two arguments, x and y. So we are going to check in this function whenever it is called, there is a need for having two arguments. We are going to check if x is larger than y. So this function is going to find the maximum value. If x is larger than y, return x. Otherwise, it means that y is bigger, therefore return y. Okay. So this function is called find maximum, and two numbers are passed, 7 and 10. And the output of this function is assigned to the result variable, and we are printing the result variable here. So we are calling the find maximum function with 7 and 10. So x is 7, y is 10. We are checking to see if 7 is larger than 10 or not. So 7, is it larger than 10? Here we are checking it. No, it's not true. So this part is not executed. It goes to the else part and it is going to return y, which is number 10. So 10 is assigned to result and we are here printing the result in the output. So in this lecture, we learned about 5 examples of functions in Python. First of all, we learned why do we need to have functions to avoid repetition and improve the readability of the code. Then we learned about the function to add two numbers. For example, here we were adding x and y. We learned about having the function to calculate the square of a number. We learned about the function to check if a number is even or not. And we learned how to have a function to greet a person. And finally, we learned about how to find the maximum of two numbers. Thank you for watching.